It's a little difficult to focus on a session like tech policy and how tech enables policy and policy enables tech after a good lunch, but I'm sure you all are going to stay awake. May I see a raise of hands, please, that you're awake? Yes, that's a good sign. And I'm sure this is going to be an interesting discussion out here. Pawan will be joining us in a bit, should be in. Let me just set the context a bit. So when the internet was thrown open to the public in 1995, I know it was there in 1986 for the research bodies and the academic institutions, but in 1995 when it was thrown open to the public, there was a lot of excitement in the air because this was a kind of an arena that nobody knew much about, and there was a lot of freedom. So online freedom was an unregulated kind of freedom that we were talking about. Then suddenly in the year 2000, we had the government step in, and of course you had the IT Act 2000 in October 2020. The interesting part is, at that point in time, you just had about 5.5 million internet users, and you had just one intermediary. If you look at today's times, today's digital age, you're seeing that times have radically changed. Today, there are multiple types of intermediaries. We have e-commerce, digital media, social media, OTT, gaming, AI, etc. And as far as the internet users are concerned, there are going to be an estimated 900 million internet users by 2025. I think we already have about 750 million currently. And most of them, I think a majority of them are in the 10 to 29 age bracket. And there are, as METI itself puts it, new and more complex forms of malware, whether you want to call it catfishing, doxing, cyber stalking, cyber trolling, gaslighting, and many such exotic names. But coupled with hate speech, spread of disinformation, fake news, and not to forget deep fakes, real-time voice cloning, etc., with the advent of generative AI, which most of us identify with ChatGPT. Now, the fact is that tech advancements such as Web3, blockchain, the metaverse, AI, generative AI, quantum computing, gene editing, etc., they can drive growth, but they can also rattle individuals, companies, and governments with privacy, security, job loss, and AGI concerns. AGI basically is what we know as artificial general intelligence, where we fear that machines will become smarter than humans. On the privacy front, for instance, India is yet to introduce a data protection bill for its 1.4 billion population in this digital age. Now, that's an area of concern. As Stuart Brand, an author and editor of the Whole Earth Catalog, put it, once a new technology rolls out, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road. Now, we have to decide whether we want to be part of the steamroller or part of the road. Now, in this context, this panel, which is aptly titled, How Can Tech Enable Policy and Policy Enable Tech, hopes to focus on how emerging technologies will keep on pushing governments to tweak existing policies or even introduce new ones. And the second part is about how good policy frameworks in turn will enable or help newer technologies blossom while preventing them from having an unbridled run. For instance, remain inclusive, have fewer biases, use interoperable standards, etc. Now, that said, technology is not easy to regulate. Welcome, Pawan, please. So technology basically is not easy to regulate, and Pawan will tell you more about that. And governments struggle to keep up with all they need to do to keep abreast of this new technology. And as a result, sometimes the regulations that we see, they appear to be a patchwork of rules, notifications, guidelines, etc., instead of having some kind of coherent form and vision. Now, such policies end up being reactive rather than proactive, which at times also results in shunning or banning technologies. And we have examples like bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, online gaming. These are some cases in point. On the positive side, governments over the years have built the foundation for a true digital India. We have an exemplary India stack, Aadhaar-enabled services, we have UPI, we have the account aggregator, we have ONDC, and we are working on the health stack, just to name a few. And India is also introducing the Digital India Act to supersede the IT Act 2000. And the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill may also soon see the light of day. And India is also choosing to finalize its AI policy. I think that's of tremendous interest to everybody. Now, if you look at the Digital India Act, the framework, that appears to be a well thought out framework. It comprises the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the National Data Governance Policy, the DIA rules, the IPC amendments for cybercrimes, and global standard laws to act as a catalyst and enabler for a $1 trillion digital economy. Now, given these developments, our discussion that we'll be having will focus on four broad areas. How effective has India been in sort of framing a good tech policy? I'm sure our panelists will give us a lot of examples. What challenges does a country like India face in this context? What can we learn from other countries like the US, the European Union, Singapore, etc.? And are Indian policymakers implementing concepts like design thinking, systems thinking, game theory, theory of change, etc., in this context? So, given this interesting context that we have, Rama, I would like to start with you. You have a repertoire of knowledge over the years. We have worked with many policymakers, and of course, you yourself have been the former CEO of the DSCI. Give us a kind of a how effective has India been, as far as policy making is concerned, and if you can give us some examples, that will help.
Yeah. So I wanted to first step back from the immediate current environment of the digital tech policy. I've spent more than 35 years in the tech industry working with state governments and central government. I would say India has done a phenomenal job over the last 25 years, leveraging technology for servicing citizens and consumers at scale. I think we in India, now we talk a lot about digital payments and UPI, but I would say we in India were the first to roll out core banking and internet banking at the scale at which it was. We were one of the first to mandate 128-bit encryption for banking consumer services. And similarly, when you look at integrated government to citizen services, the e-governance as it was called, before we moved into the entire digital stack for governance, public service delivery, almost a majority of the states were leading in terms of policy enablements on how to break silos between departments and ministries and agencies so that you can have an integrated citizen service delivery and what is the platforms, how do you build interoperability solutions and standards-based Unicode, XML between departments so that the entire citizen can be delivered services in an integrated way, online, on mobile, and at a kiosk kind of a thing. And in all of this, we had, even at a state level, where we would never give credit to what states do with technology, even at a state level, public service delivery acts, accepting digital signatures. We led the way. I don't think there were any such instances of that kind of technology adoption at scale in any parts of the world, even in the most mature countries at that point of time. So I would say we've always excelled very well in leveraging technology to service citizens and to service consumers. And I think our banking sector and the public service delivery systems in the country are big proofs of that. I would believe with that background is where things like Aadhaar, we talked about the Jamstack or the UPI, all of them are built on top of that. So I would say the way we've done a great job is leveraging technology and collaborating with industry. I'll just give an example. When there was proliferation of technology at end user level, we had this challenge of the conformance to standards for Indian languages, right? MeitY at that point of time had the courage, the political will and the conviction to work with the biggest tech companies to make sure Unicode is integrated, and they played, pardon my language, played ball in conforming to Unicode. And it was a long exercise. Industry fought with ministry. I was fighting with the ministry. I was fighting with my headquarters. At that point of time, I was in a large big tech company. But ultimately, we said that there is no other way but we have to conform to Unicode. So I would say we have good history on the way we have leveraged technology and innovated that technology at scale and come up with policies. Maybe we didn't have a policy upfront for PKI and for XML and all those standards. But as we started rolling out, I'm just using two examples of e-governance and banking systems, we came up with the necessary policies to ensure that technology adoption was there. We did not wait to come out with some perfect policy after years of deliberation and waited for the technology. We drove technology adoption and we came out with enabling frameworks and policies.
Thanks, Uma. I think you came up with some very valid points out here, especially the stress and the emphasis on the Unicode part of it, and also, given that India is a federal country, the importance of states over there. Ashish, you have also deep experience in this particular field. You have tracked policy for many years. And you have also been a journalist. So I'm saying, so you can give us the kind of perspective. Rama has already spoken of some of the positives. You may want to add to that with some examples.
Yeah, so thanks. Glad to be here. I completely echo what Rama just said. I mean, clearest example coming from NASSCOM is that the entire tech sector, the way it has grown, one could simply say that, less policies and very directed policies which were instrumental in allowing the industry to scale up itself as a starting point. We had the special economic zones and they really worked very well. And we have seen that benefit. There are hardly any developing countries which have this kind of a software services industry. And I think we have done wonders. And obviously it is driven by the industry entrepreneurship and so much of effort. Now we are nearly $250 billion exports. Beyond this, I think if I look at my experience, about 20, 30 years back, financial inclusion used to be about rural branches being opened and all of that. It was Herculean task. The cost of remitting money at a postal department level was around 5%. So all of that would have been, we could have continued to trudge along and do incremental progress. But then technology came along and pretty much mobile became the branch. And we have made tremendous progress. So if you think about policy objectives, technology has, in all the areas you can think of, played an instrumental role. But we must remember that technology is just a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It is entirely up to us to decide what we want to do with it. And coming now, I think, Leslie, you mentioned about privacy and fundamental right being treated like that. Now I think we are moving to a stage where the entire idea of digital has also become a baseline. So if you are thinking of Digital India and we are thinking of Digital India Act, the next set of opportunity for us is to say that, how do we make sure that the policy enables this at a government level, at a state level. And I think what is interesting there is that while industry has unbundled and rebundled over the last decade and more, and we have had products which are now combination products across insurance, banking, and services have merged and combined. But the regulatory architecture has, while it has evolved, it has pretty much stayed similar and same. And which means that if we are to now look at the entire digital opportunity, we need to think about how that can be addressed so that we can actually make huge progress in this. And then there are also specific technologies. So we talk about some of these big examples, right? Simple thing like encryption. It's a great technology from a privacy and data protection point of view, but it also becomes a source of challenge for law enforcement. Now, it is entirely up to us to decide that how do we want to drive our policy so that we can preserve privacy. And this is an ongoing debate, it's a global debate, it's going on. Then there are certain very clear policies or technologies like there is something called differential privacy. What it can do is that it can allow you to share your data without being worried about your privacy concerns. Let's see if you have time, I'll just illustrate with an example. So let's say, there is a survey being done of college students, and this is an MIT example I'm quoting, and the survey is about who cheated in exams. And it's an anonymous survey, you'll not be asked for names. Any guesses, will students participate? Usually no, right? Now what this differential privacy introduces is to say that, okay, fine, when you're answering this question, toss a coin. If you get a head, answer truthfully. If you get it tails, toss the coin again. If it is heads, say yes, and if it is heads or otherwise, say no. What this does is that this technology introduces a noise in the survey, but at an aggregate level, it doesn't kind of compromise on the overall result of the survey. So this is a very simple technology which can help people participate and preserve privacy. So there is a whole bunch of privacy preserving technologies. Now it's up to us, for industry and for government, to leverage all of this to think about data protection law and data protection aspects. So it is not about just law. I think it's so much also about technology, and that's something which is an interesting conversation.
Thanks, Ashish. I think you already touched on the last part of the thing where I was saying that, okay, whether we can introduce, concepts like game theory, theory of change, systems thinking, concepts. So you have touched on it a bit. And I like the fact that you brought out how nuanced this entire policy making and process is. So it's not linear, as most people think, that you have a big policy and we are done with it. There are lots of bits and pieces that make the entire sum. Saranya, you come with a lot of experience in the fintech space. A lot of focus gets onto the whole, from a digital India point of view, like, a tremendous amount of focus gets onto privacy, security and all. Fintech has all those kind of elements and so much more, and then there's money involved that each one of us is concerned. So you can tell us more about what's happening in that space in this context.
Sure. No, thanks, Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm going to play a little turncoat in the conversation. I think, especially given the roles I've played, I've had a ringside view into the successes of, let's say, India Stack, and of course, UPI, which has become, quite honestly, the blue-eyed digital payment of the world at this point. So I would be the last to criticize any of these interventions. And I think what has been really special about each of these has been, to my mind, two defining policy characteristics. One is that it was built with an India-first approach. They did not look at adapting an existing technology stack or existing literature into an Indian context. It was thought of India first, and that's why the mobile-first technology, ensuring that it works for our ecosystem. We are at an interesting point in our country's history where there are people who haven't been introduced to banking at all, leaping right directly into mobile banking. They bypass the entire internet banking experience. They have no concept of, maybe even shortly, they won't even have the idea of credit cards. And you'll be able to get directly to mobile banking, such as UPI. So I think that has been a very interesting aspect. The second piece for me, and this is about the way that, let's say, RBI regulates overall, is using existing trust infrastructure and compounding it with new interventions and players. And that's a very important aspect, especially in a country like India, where trust is where, especially in the movement of money, ensuring that you're using existing trust infrastructures is the only way towards expanding, whether it's in terms of reach, growth, or introducing newer forms of interaction. I think those two aspects India has not just done well, but has stood uniquely in the way that it has proliferated these existing payments. But having said that, as an industry player and looking at it from an industry body perspective as well, there are definitely places for improvement, whether it's in terms of consultation, whether it's in terms of thinking through some of the ways in which rubber hits road. And I'm sure we'll have further conversation about that.
Yeah, so we'll come to the challenges in a bit.
Sure thing.
So we were just talking about the opportunities, and I think you gave us a bird's eye view of what's happening in the fintech sector. Usually, when you meet a lawyer, you don't keep them waiting. In this particular case, I have kept Pawan waiting, but there's a reason behind this. Because you always want to know that when you create a kind of a policy, what are the legal angles out here? Because in today's world, when we are talking about policy making, I mean, everything revolves around the law at this point in time. So we are hearing about the IT Act being 2000 being replaced. I mean, of course, it was amended in 2008 and 2009, then the rules 2011, which I remember discussing this at length with you. And now we are on the verge of getting something what is being touted as a path-breaking kind of act. So kindly just educate us on to what are the kind of opportunity that we see out here, and how does it tie up with the entire Digital India vision?
Thanks, Leslie. Today, India is very remarkably placed. I often see India in the midst of a big journey. I see India as a road model where a lot of countries are actually looking eagerly forward to how India is moving, specifically on the legal policy and regulatory stuff. So we began our journey early, 2000, and that was the time that we were basing our law on the United Nations Universal Model Law on Electronic Commerce. The IT Act, when it was passed, nobody had any clue what was happening, including the Parliament. And they did not even know what they were actually passing, which ultimately became the mother legislation of India. Today, the Indian Information Technology Act is one legislation that governs everything in the electronic format in India. So in India, if you're using computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data and information in the electronic form, you get covered under this law. For the last almost 23 years, we've just had this primary legislation. Of course, Section 87 gave massive power to the government to come up with secondary legislations. So various rules and regulations came in 2011 and then now 2021. Meanwhile, we saw a new journey. You see, India has always been cognizant of the fact that we should be interfering to the least extent possible as far as growth of IT sector is concerned. That's the reason why the IT sector predominantly grew to the size it was, because there was lack of any regulatory interference in that regard. So from the year 2000 till almost 2011, there was virtually nothing happening barring the Information Technology Amendment Act that we passed 30 days after the Mumbai attacks in 2008. 2011 was a watershed moment. Why? Because we came up for the first time with rules which stipulated the due diligence parameters to be fulfilled by all intermediaries, had various elements pertaining to reasonable security practices and procedures. Meanwhile, a lot of things were happening. Aadhaar was emerging from just the shadow of an executive order to becoming the mainstream of the Indian digital economy. So 2016, we came up with the Aadhaar Act. 2019, we came up with the Aadhaar Amendment Act, 2019. Meanwhile, 2021, we actually now came up with the IT rules, which have been the defining force as to changing the color of the landscape. Well, come to mid-2017s, and we see two things happening in Supreme Court. Number one, Justice Puttaswamy's two landmark judgments. First saying we all are entitled to privacy as a fundamental right, and in the Aadhaar Act, where the Supreme Court says Aadhaar is not mandatory. Now, pursuant thereto, it was actually seeded in the Aadhaar litigation that we saw the appointment of Justice Sri Krishna Committee. The report came 2018 with a draft Digital or Personal Data Protection Bill 2018. Government took 1 year, came up with a Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. Since then, there's been extensive deliberations, but then COVID came. COVID was actually, in a retrospective sense, a God-sent opportunity. It was a massive public health emergency, but from a digitization perspective, and from a perspective of nation reaping the benefits of its digital initiatives, COVID actually demonstrated a great experimental ground. No wonder more and more Indians came onto the digital bandwagon. The UPIs of the world started demonstrating to the world that India does not need to be a follower. India becomes the leader where other countries actually follow. And now we have a spate of legislations that's coming up. The IT Rules 2021 came into effect on 25th of February 21, amended in October 22, updated in 6th of April 2023. Completely changing the landscape, bringing in far more accountability, transparency for intermediaries. You can no longer say, Chief, I'm going to be a spectator while mayhem happens on my network. That's not on. You try doing that, and you taste the taste of your medicine, because Twitter tasted its own medicine, because Rule 7 of the IT rule says, you don't comply, no problem. You just be prepared for two consequences. Number one, you lose your statutory exemption from legal liability. Number two, you become liable for being punished for offenses under the Information Technology Act 2000 and rules and regulations, and also under the Indian Penal Code. So the government has been very, very clear. They're ultimately wanting compliance to certain minimum adherence of standards of due diligence. And now with this new spate of legislations coming in, I find India at a very historical cusp of a new golden opportunity. Why? We've already become the most populous nation in the world, the biggest e-commerce market in the world. In this kind of a scenario, we are at a very unique, shall I say, vacuum of history. We don't have a dedicated law on data protection. We don't have a dedicated law on privacy. We also do not have a dedicated law on cybersecurity. On top of it, we haven't even begun thinking about artificial intelligence.
Pawan, you're already getting into the challenges bit, so I'll just, if you can hold your horses out there.
Sure.
But, I love these forums because this is the only time you can get a lawyer to give you free advice. So, that's it. And I think you have given us a clear, I have a question for the audience. How many of you actually knew that the IT Act 2000 is being amended and you're getting the Digital India Act? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, so many people in the audience were not aware. So I hope this was some education to all of you all that it's going to impact our lives, and I think that's why, panel discussions like these are important. Rama, we'll just come to the kind of challenges. We have spoken about the opportunities at length. We have shown, I think all of us concur that India has done some exemplary work as far as Digital India is concerned, and the kind of, tech tying into policy and policy, complementing tech as such. I think we gave a lot of examples. But clearly not everything is rosy, and which Pawan slightly alluded to and Saranya was also alluding to. But let's get a bit deeper into the challenges. What are the kind of things that you can see that might spoil the party? Now, the reason why I'm asking is the context is that a thing like generative AI just comes up. In the last 6-7 years, we have been speaking about AI. At that point in time, we saw that people were getting unnerved. Business models, like I was discussing with Ashish at some point there, that they were being disrupted. But suddenly, the last 6 months, from December to now, we have had a spate of, I think, more than 150 kind of large language models that have just stemmed up. ChatGPT, Bing, Bard, Hugging Face, Hugging Chat, etc. I mean, most of the people might be overwhelmed. What are the kind of challenges that you see in the light of all this?
So what I see is, we project ourselves and we are the largest growing digital hub in the world. But we are not accelerating our enabling policies. I'll give you an example in terms of cloud. We were one of the first to start the Megraj policy, and government taking a stand both at a central and many states that they will do a cloud-first strategy for public service delivery. And with such a path-breaking initiative, we are still debating on whether, some sectors should be cloud-enabled, should they move to public cloud, whereas the world has moved on. So, US government came up with the FedRAMP policy. Most banking sector regulators across the world are encouraging migration to public cloud, whereas we are still debating on community cloud, private cloud. So we've lost almost close to 10 years on leveraging the benefits of cloud for accelerating, our digital economy. That's one example I would talk about. The second challenge I would see is academia plus industry plus some central bodies in government, doing a horizon scanning of technology way ahead of the time before something gets launched in some geography. Generative AI is a good example. Or even overall AI is an example. We are not investing enough in horizon scanning of future technologies and doing your design thinking, system designs approach to what should be the policy enablers or what will that technology, what could be potential harms of technology. I'll give you a simple example of a lot of discourse that is happening in terms of AI in criminal justice system. I mean, at the risk of, getting into Pavanji's domain. All of us know in criminal justice system something called recidivism. What is recidivism? For a criminal to repeat its offense, which is a big thing. Where there is a lot of deliberation happening is AI systems are proliferating in criminal justice systems, particularly in coming up with predictive software, which are going to determine the outcomes of trials, outcomes of decisions for parole and all of that. Now the challenge is, are we investing time in that? Are lawyers plus software engineers plus public interest professionals, public policy professionals coming together and discussing on implications of AI in a certain domain, as important as criminal justice system, or in healthcare, or in cancer research. So we talk at AI at a very generic level. We are not the challenges of AI in financial services systems versus challenges of applying AI in healthcare or in human resource management or criminal are very different. So I would say we need to be able to start looking at applications of an emerging technology ahead of before the industry comes up with those proprietary systems or whatever. Why is there so much discourse around, algorithmic transparency? One of the best example I said is the criminal justice system. Nothing can be more critical that you release a prisoner and our AI system has not trained itself. And so the challenges are same thing we are seeing at a state level, because when you look at cybersecurity, data protection and privacy, there needs to be a synergy between the central and the state governments and the industry. The biggest challenge I see, which was not there 5 or 6 years back, I'm sure Ashish may agree with me, is that even industry ecosystem is very finely segmented. The problems with the policy constructs will vary for startups, for services, the big tech, or user industries like banks and telecoms. Whenever a cybersecurity regulation or some directive comes from CERT, every industry segment, there may be some overall challenges, but every industry segment has a different view. So no longer, because the way digital adoption is so nuanced at a sectoral level on how it is getting employed, an umbrella policy is needed, but it also needs to look at those sectoral and industry segment focus, and that is where I believe we are losing the
made a very valid point. I mean, right, given that India's federal structure, which you spoke about earlier, center state and state with an umbrella kind of policy and then sectoral. Ashish, NASSCOM has been doing a lot of stuff in this thing. I know you may not be able to be as forthcoming as us as far as the challenges are concerned, but that's a challenge to you. Can you highlight what are the kind of hurdles that, say, even a body like yours is facing when sort of coming up with, because I know that you'll come up with reports every second day on how these policies have to be devised. How much of it is actually seeing the light of day? How much of it is actually being implemented? And if not, why exactly?
So Leslie, all hurdles and challenges are opportunities, right?
That's a nice way of putting it.
So I wouldn't, for example, you talked about data protection bill, 5 years of consultation. I wouldn't sweat over it too much that it hasn't got enacted yet, because it is important to get it right. And I think it's a journey which made us realize that we don't need a GDPR. And we can't afford the upfront compliance cost of GDPR. So it suits Europe, good for them. We will know the benefits in a decade or two. So, and we should get our law right. And I think, so that's one example. The second thing is that you can't regulate what you don't understand. You can probably prohibit or restrict. So increasingly, with the newer business models and emerging technologies, that's the biggest challenge, because, I mean, as India, we started like manufacturing, and then we used to say services is difficult to understand. Now, within services, what is this tech company doing? It's very difficult to understand for an outsider, much like a law enforcement agency and so on and so forth. So I think that challenge is something that needs to be addressed through industry use cases and examples. So it's very easy to think of designing laws and policies, but it's important to understand what are the actual harms that are coming up and to be able to understand actual problems and then let the law deal with them rather than trying, and I think you mentioned it, somebody mentioned it, that you can't design a perfect law. So it's like designing a software. Unless you have specifications, the software will be outdated before it's done. And the last point, I think, Rama, you mentioned about artificial intelligence. It's a huge opportunity for India, right? We talked about 1.4 billion people. On an average, in the LLM model, the thing is that it can be minimum 30% productivity boost. So if that is the opportunity, it's a huge opportunity for us as a nation. So what do we want to do about it in terms of regulation? I think while we think of hard regulation, we need to think about where there is amplification of existing harms, and we should think about whether our existing laws can deal with them, whether we have the enforcement capabilities to deal with them, whether we can do consumer or citizen awareness so that they are able to protect themselves. Beyond this, I think there is also, so for example, does anybody know what does creating a large language model cost in terms of money and effort? It's hundreds and billions of dollars, right? So we are the third largest tech ecosystem in terms of startups. So if India were to say that, okay, fine, we are going to have a policy where we are going to, you talk about Meghraj, Rama, but if we can, as a nation, build a open LLM model, if we can make available the compute required for AI to function, and we can create data sets, we have troves of data, and if we can make that data available, so I think that kind of a policy is what will allow us to leverage the entire AI opportunity in some ways. And we have done that through DPI model, so it is in a way an extension of that. So I think these are the opportunities, and we shouldn't think of necessarily as these as challenges. And sometimes in a day-to-day working, you see that, like, okay, this policy is a problem, this is a, yes. But if you zoom out and you look at how has India done in last 20 years, where are these bad policies really? So I think in that sense, overall, I would tend to think of it as a huge opportunity for the country.
No, fair enough, Ashish. That's a point of view that we would respect. We may not necessarily agree with it because, I mean, I don't think every challenge can be seen as an opportunity. But then, I mean, we have different ways, and plurality of thought is what makes a democracy out here. But Saranya, regardless of how you see it as a challenge or an opportunity, what are the kind of learnings from other countries that you see? Whether it's, like, say, Meta was recently fined, I think 1.3 euros, if I'm not mistaken, million euros for the GDPR kind of violations out there. And we have had a lot of cross-pollination of data, especially in the fintech sector, with hundreds of thousands of startups out here. What are the kind of challenges you see when these kind of policies are made, and what are the kind of learnings that you see from other countries, whether it be the US? I know that NIST has done a lovely job as far as the AI policies are concerned. You see the European Union, which has been very proactive in many of these sectors, especially GDPR. And then, of course, you have countries like Singapore, etc., also that have been at the forefront. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I think, again, I am a huge believer of indigenous products and policies. And I think that best reflects the ground reality. But having said that, I think there are certain paces where, I'm going to talk about both. I'm going to talk about where we have done some interesting things which were global first, and vice versa. Like, for example, a slightly contentious example would be tokenization, which hit the fintech industry recently. And while this may sound fintech specific, I think you've all been impacted by it. One fine day, there was a little bit of a change in your credit card flow. You had to save your credit card details. You were asked an extra OTP and things like that. And that, as annoying as it was and as troubling as it was, I assure you, was the happy ending at the end of a very long conversation. Which was one day, RBI came out with guidelines which said that no entity can store credit card data, and you can't store the card number anymore. And what that would mean is at every time at checkout, you'd have to enter 16 digits, which was what you call 1643, which is 16 digits, your expiry date, and your CVV. And it is almost assured that if that is going to be the checkout experience, the dropouts would be north of 60%. And obviously it was a major concern. Now, I think what is important to understand was that RBI didn't mean this in a flippant manner. It was on the heels of what to its mind was substantial data leakages. There were many stories of data breaches. And interestingly, UPI gave RBI, the regulator, and the ecosystem the language to say that payments are possible without there being sensitive data, which, if leaked, can lead to any damage. If I share my UPI, my VPA on the stage to the entire room, nothing really is going to happen to to the funds in my linked UPI account. That, I think, really created a brand new world for RBI, and they came out saying that, you know what, there's one solution to this. Don't store card data anymore, no data leakage, no breach, and everybody's safe. How the industry reacted to that was, of course, first saying, bad idea, let's not do this. But eventually, we got to a period of solutioning, where, of course, the credit card companies, the card companies, Visa and MasterCard, took the lead in that, and they came up with the tokenization solution, the result of which is what the new changed experience is. While tokenization did exist globally before, in the way that it was adopted to India, there had to be changes made. Definitely there are qualms at the timelines for compliance and so on and so forth, but it led to a very interesting new solution across the world. On the flip side of what we can take from other nations, definitely, as much as I am an RBI fangirl, I also greatly appreciate the work being done at MAS. Monetary Authority of Singapore is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's non-trivial that I think that they're one of the best funded regulators across the world, and I'm sure that has an impact. But the lead that as a regulator they have taken on, let's say, fintech and AI, they have been able to create very compelling sandboxes with results run by the authority, run by the regulator. And that is not just a proactive approach to what everybody's seeing as a boogeyman, but saying, let's figure out the language around this, and let's start solving for it before, before the story comes home. So I think these were two examples of what we have been able to take to the world, as well as, I think, definitely examples that we can lead from. GDPR continues to be a bad idea.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that common refrain that has been around, I think all of us concur on that, is think global but act local, which we anyway have to do. I don't think we have much of an option out there. But when we are speaking about, like, say, for instance, learnings from GDPR or the Safe Harbor, data localization, etc., a lot of things are coming in the Digital India Act. But I know, Pawan, when you were just about to talk about the challenges, I did tell you that I'll come back to you, and here's my promise, I come back to you. So you can tell us a bit about the kind of challenges that one faces in this particular thing.
Thanks. Before I go to the challenges, two societal elements happening today. Number one, the great Indian vomiting revolution is on. Indians are vomiting data about their personal, professional, social lives on the internet. Number two, the golden age of cybercrime has already begun with the coming of COVID-19. With this kind of a background, when I look at the challenges, I find a number of challenges. Number one, we don't have a dedicated law on cybersecurity. The Indian IT Act is thoroughly inadequate to deal with cybersecurity. We had come up with a remarkable National Cybersecurity Policy 2013, but we could not implement it. It remained a paper tiger. We are all waiting for the cybersecurity strategy of the government. Number two, India has still not made up its mind on how does it want to deal with the entire issue of artificial intelligence. Is artificial intelligence a legal entity? Can I grant legal status to them? If so, what's the basis of the AI contracts that get engaged in? How about AI actually empowering cybercrime as a service? And how does the law deal with it? Those are fundamental issues. We haven't even begun thinking about but we require to think them even more because in my latest book, GPT-4 and Law and ChatGPT and Legalities, I've extensively argued that till such time you don't deal with these legal policy issues, you're going nowhere as a nation or nowhere as a society. Why? Because these technologies are here to stay. 2062 is what they say. Human intelligence will be surpassed by AI. I strongly disagree. The tipping point is going to come between 2035 and 2040. Now that's the kind of scenario when Future of Life Institute is opening and giving an open letter to the entire AI giants. Please pause giant AI experiments for 6 months in order to enable legal frameworks to develop. Well, they have a logical reason. It's a different issue altogether that nobody is listening, and the arms race is continuing. Yet another big challenge that India currently faces is that India has done nothing on Internet of Things. At a time when California has come up with an IoT law, US has come up with a Federal IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, the Cyber Resilience Act is going in the European Union. I think IoT is being extensively utilized in India, but the legalities pertaining to IoT and now IOB, which is the Internet of Behavior, need to be appropriately addressed. Number 3, the entire issue of blockchain needs to be looked at far more seriously. Unfortunately, the equation that blockchain is equal to crypto currencies like bitcoins has to give way to much more broader understanding. When the maturing of the technology is taking place, it's time that you provide minimal enabling flying wings to the technology so as to give appropriate legal standing for the same. Yes, we need to make up our minds whether we want to legalize crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, or crypto tokens at large. Yet another big challenge is now metaverse. Metaverse, you would not like it, but it's already begun to start getting embraced by India at large. But then metaverse is coming slowly. The cybercrime on metaverse is coming at a much bigger pace. Recently, one of our clients' female avatar on the metaverse got digitally raped by a male avatar. The client wants to push for digital rape charges. Unfortunately, the law does not allow digital rape as a concept so far. So the legalities of the avatars, the digital humans on metaverse will have to be appropriately addressed. Also, the enabling metaverse contracts between entities will have to be given an appropriate legal JAMA, as I say it. And now quantum computing is already on the horizon. 50-qubit quantum computer has arrived. That means your and my passwords are going to be history because they will be broken in a few seconds. How does the law deal with it? And on top of it, these newly emerging kinds of technologies, specifically generative AI, is effectively asking the nation that please come up with new things. And finally, when I look at Digital India Act, it's a great step forward. But please understand, one big challenge will be, how do you plan to replace the Digital India Act, or the IT Act with the Digital India Act? Why? Because the IT Act has become so omnipotent, it's got so many tentacles all over, getting them to unravel, unwork, and rework with the new Digital India Act will require a lot of thought process, more so when there are going to be intrinsic conflicts between the IT Act and the Digital India Act. So a lot of opportunities are there, but a lot of challenges are also there. We are still waiting for judge-made law, and good news is judges have begun to start using ChatGPT. So it's not just a Colombian judge who's used ChatGPT for giving a judgment in February 2023. It's a judge in the Punjab and Haryana High Court who's used ChatGPT for the purposes of giving some portions of a judgment. But then we'll have to handle all these things with care. Why? Because undue reliance on these technologies means your privacy goes for a massive 6 at a time when you don't have a privacy law. Your data, in any case, is going out of the territorial boundaries of India on servers located in other countries. And number 3, your digital profile is constantly getting updated. So the next time you go to these bards of the world or the chat GPTs of the world, remember one thing, they will want to play the music that you would want to hear. So if that's the case, that's a dangerous phenomenon. Because how do we actually go ahead and legally enable that these newly emerging technologies do not go ahead and trample upon human interests, do not go ahead and become rogue, which AI has already documented to start getting rogue. So a lot of work needs to be done, and I think these are more than challenges, great opportunities. So it's not just the Telecommunications Bill 2022 that we are working on, it's now a number of other issues that we'll have to start working on a simultaneous basis. I can no longer say, I have the IT Act and I'm done. No, sorry. You'll have to do a number of supplemental legislations under the broad umbrella of cyber law as you go forward.
Thanks, Pawan. I can see Ashish smiling. So see, at the end of the day, it's an opportunity. But yeah, and then of course you could also have voice cloning by a digital avatar. You never know what can happen. So these are sort of, times that we don't fully comprehend. But how many people in the audience actually think that we'll see some resemblance of an AGI by, say, 2030? Anybody in the audience feels that we'll see a sentient kind of machine? Not a single one of you? Good. So people don't believe, so it's all humbug? Okay, I guess people are non-committal about the AGI part of it, which is probably they are seeing a proper semblance of sanity out here. But Rama and Ashish, both of you, I think Pawan brought up a lot of things that were sort of wanting, say, especially when AI is concerned. But I know that, so we have the Niti Aayog policy that happened in 2018. After that, there were several attempts, and I think even the ministers, whether it's Ashwini Kumar and Rajiv Chandrasekhar, on various occasions have spoken that there's a new law as far as AI, the guardrails will be put around AI. What's your sense on what's going to happen, and how much of an opportunity is out there, what more needs to be done?
So I think the Niti Aayog AI one was more an AI strategy and not a policy. That was aimed at driving adoption of AI, and they were supporting pilots at a state level in agri and healthcare and in other things. So it was more a positive developmental approach to harnessing AI for overall social good and overall good of the country. So where I would say is, similar to the privacy one, increasingly the regulatory scanner around algorithmic transparency. I think that is gaining a lot of credence, because I think the biggest challenge is not because those AI systems are built in a wrong way. It is because the way those mathematical constructions have happened and the kind of training data is obtained. Because those systems engineers, the primary goal is the training data sets and building those algorithms for optimizing for performance efficiencies. The systems engineers, whether it is in an Indian software company or in a global tech company, their primary explicit goal is not the algorithm being not having biases and fairness. They build algorithms to be able to, harness the technology for a particular use case and select the training data. Maybe that selecting of the training data needs a lot more rigor, right? So I would say increasingly there is a lot of discourse, because so many years back this book was written about, around AI and the way the financial sector crash happened in the US, where, weapons of math destruction, where that's a very famous book. So I think the challenge for us in India as we move forward is, how do we get the public policy people to understand your mathematical constructions of the AI algorithms, and how do you sensitize the tech companies, global or Indian or a startup, in giving these principles of fairness, equity, justice, privacy enabled while building those algorithms, because they're not tuned for that. Yeah. And typically what is happening, the challenge is that when an AI system gets rolled out, any public interest or public policy or government gets into evaluating its fairness towards the end, which is like sending the input and sending the output, and is it right? They're not involved in the design, in the curating of the data. I think increasingly we will see that, because there's a lot more cognizance of the challenges of AI, yeah. Whereas initially it was all about harnessing AI. And I believe the sectoral people in healthcare, in all of them, will start giving this importance.
Fair enough.
Just like the way we are giving more importance to privacy.
And yeah, I think explainable AI is a kind of a thing that people are talking about, and they have been talking about it for the last 3-4 years. So I'm sure there's a lot more emphasis on that. Ashish, your quick thoughts on this?
So I think if you just refer to AI, there is this pre-generative AI world and there is this post-generative AI world. So whatever you might have thought earlier, it's safe to say it's outdated. So you need to think afresh. And just thinking is not going to be sufficient. You need to have a mission mode about it. And I think at least that's a conversation that is happening in the government, to say that, what is it that India can do. And it's all about how we can harness this opportunity of AI. So it's a good thing. I think it's evolving. We need to be agile about it. I don't think we can think immediately in terms of hard-coded laws or very detailed policy frameworks. I think we need to learn by doing, and I think that's the approach.
I can take a few questions from the audience. Anybody has a question? How tech enables policy, policy enables tech, anything around the challenges, hurdles? Does that gentleman have a question? Can you give him a mic, please? Can somebody hand over a mic? A mic, please. Yeah. Kindly identify yourself and what's your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm Kapil. I'm part of Accenture. So I just want to understand. I mean, everybody's talking about AI, generative AI, cloud, etc. But we understand that once we have more data, we need to store that data. We need to have more servers, and nobody is talking about sustainability. In terms of, when you are creating those servers, you are obviously creating more data centers, you are utilizing more energy, which is leading to more scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. So, I mean, is government doing anything related to that? We know that we have, laws in Europe coming up with CRST, people in US also talking about what's India doing around sustainability.
Fair enough. Ashish, Rama, I guess you all may want to take that question.
So I think it's a fair question, and India hasn't done anything specifically in terms of AI servers, bit in terms of policy, but overall in terms of clean tech policy, I think there's a lot of work happening. There's also a lot of work happening in enabling finance for clean tech, and there's a lot of initiative which is happening within industry. And not all of it is happening within India. I think it is happening globally, but the benefit of those technologies is flowing into the country. But again, it's about saying that, what is it that you want to prioritize and what is the scale of the problem that you want to then focus on. So currently today, is that the topmost concern in terms of have we reached that level of compute where we want to start addressing that? I would just think about that, yeah.
Sorry,
Yes,
if I can
please.
just add on to that.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I think what's also happening in parallel is the way that AI models are being built on is also changing. Pretty soon we're going to get to a point where it doesn't require large data sets to to inform AI models. I think there's a lot of research happening into, to draw parallels the way a child learns. It's not by seeing 1,000 dogs. The child is able to see one dog and understand what a dog is. So, I mean, that's a very layman's example, but those kind of small data set modeling is also happening in the way that AI is being developed as a whole. So completely take your point, but I think some of these globally, there are perspectives which respect or appreciate those points, and also towards ensuring that the models themselves are more inclusive, that provide for insights even driven by smaller data sets. The research also is developing as well.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, because I think when GPT-3 was 175 billion parameters, GPT-4 did not disclose the amount of parameters, but I think it was... Yeah, so Llama, for instance, I think is much less, and Lima is just, I think, 65 billion parameters also. So I think they've already answering that question. Yeah, please, this gentleman. Yes. I'm noticing. I'll come to you.
My name is Sudhir. Basically, we have a platform wherein we help software companies run their various subscription-based softwares. So the challenge we are facing, especially after the new RBI rule, which doesn't allow recurring payments, that a lot of these companies are now moving to US, and which is basically increasing the cost, and ultimately we believe that India is losing out. So why is that, although we are very, very innovative, but why do we restrict the technology in, because if somebody wants to make a recurring payment, let him do that. Why you restrict that? So the credit card recurring payment system.
Government would have been a better person to understand, but if
yeah, but it's ultimately a public policy
if somebody
question.
wants to, anybody wants to volunteer, Saranya? Since
Could you repeat the question?
so many of the companies are going to the US because
Right.
it's not a for payment.
I mean, I think that's two substantial questions. I think one is the payment rails themselves about whether or not there can be allowing cross-border transactions, and the other is about domicile enabling or domicile status helping or disincentivizing an organization. So I think on the cross-border thing, that's a little bit of a tactical question, and whether or not we care for it, it will be resolved pretty soon. I think cross-border transactions, especially with India's economic goals, I think will be resolved pretty soon. The domicile status is a larger macroeconomic question, which I'm not going to prod at this point.
Fair enough. I think that gentleman had a question, or there's somebody behind, I think so. Yes, the lady, please. See, you get two mics together.
Thank you. Good evening. Very insightful, and this is something I'm working on, technology integration for effective justice delivery. I'd put this question to Pawan as to going forwards, are we going to face challenges integrating technology for effective justice delivery, or it's going to be a smooth ride? Because it's already happening, and currently we are focusing a lot on it. So given the backlog which we have in the courts, is it something which is going to help, in easing out the current backlog, technology integration, and do we foresee any challenges?
Well, I think it's a great beginning that we've made. Why? Because technology is actually coming in as a new savior. Because with huge, humongous, shall I say, areas of cases that are happening, not just at the Supreme Court level, but at lower court level, we can definitely use technology for the purposes of clubbing, for the purposes of doing other stuff. We can even take a leaf from what's happening in Estonia. In Estonia, they have actually come up with an AI judge, where the algorithm has been made the judge for up to commercial cases up to $10,000. And those cases are not going to be heard by a human, but will be heard by an algorithm. And that algorithm will give a judgment. You're not satisfied with it, you can go and appeal to a human judge. Now, if we could come up with those kinds of parameters, for example, traffic challans are taking a huge chunk of the judicial time. If traffic challans or smaller, shall I say, offenses could be brought forward for clubbing or by being effectively addressed by technology, I see a great step forward, but there's a mental pushback amongst the legal fraternity. Because by and large, when you're talking about technology being used for effective administration of justice, all stakeholders must be very well prepared to come up and deal with these challenges. And I think that's where more capacity building is required. Also, I'm not so sure how we can rely upon these technologies given the intrinsic bias that these technologies already have. Mind you, the data sets that they've actually been trained on are primarily Western data sets. They're not yet trained on Indian data sets. Also, though the national judicial grid has come in, and that's going to go a massive way forward, all it requires is some proactive thinking on how we can innovatively use these technology for effective administration of justice. Great news, we have one of the foremost thinking Chief Justices of the country who's so much clued with technology, Justice Chandrachud. And I think under his tenure, we are going to see some massive developments. Already, we are now seeing that live transcription of arguments, live transcriptions of judgments are taking place in courts, and that's only the starting point. We have already used technology for the purposes of translating now these judgments to about 15 languages. So we are ultimately wanting that the effective justice values need to be made available to people at their own homes, at the drop of a hat by technology. But given the huge volume of the nation, given the huge challenges of areas, it's going to take time. Let's not expect a magical wand that we are going to wave it and tomorrow everything will be done. It'll take some time, but yes, it's a great
So you'll have to hold your horses, in other words.
Absolutely.
How many of you in the audience would trust an AI judge? Just one. Okay, there are a couple of hands. I think you wanted to ask a question, or were you raising your hands saying that you trust an AI judge?
I have a question.
Okay, because ChatGPT hallucinates and so does an AI.
I'm heading an AI company. So
You you wouldn't.
No, but just for information, Mr. Pawan, I worked with him 2 decades ago in revision of the IT Act with Mr. Vishwanathan was there. I was representing Defense Ministry. So my question is regarding that some initiative has been taken. I read in the news that India AI. It is an initiative or maybe initial thoughts to regulate AI. Once, as the Pawan told that the IT progress has been there because government regulation or government interference has not been done, and he has been the protagonist of that. Now, this India AI, will it not stifle the free thinking or maybe the AI? Because once you regulate AI, I am pursuing the CIPRI Ethics Committee on the AI inclusion in the defense. I'm also working in the defense fields also. So that is understandable. But at the topmost level and setting up different working group and then you direct that algorithm has to be prepared like this. If you don't prepare, you'll be punished. So I just wanted the view of the panel on this.
So the focus of India AI is not to prioritize hard regulation. It is more ecosystem enablement. I think you might be referring to some recent media reports, but that's not the focus.
And I guess it gets more into the philosophical realm, what the kind of nuances that you are asking. So I'm not too sure how much of that is being encapsulated in policy making. So, but it's at a very interesting point because it's AI and ethics and AI and policy. So I'm not too sure how much of marrying of thoughts is happening out there. But it's worthwhile. Yes, I can see 2 hands out there. Yes, we'll come back. Please note that the gentleman is next. Yes, please.
My name is Simandar.
Kindly identify yourself and ask.
Yeah, my name is Simandar. I'm a scholar at Indian School of Public Policy. My question is related to the e-commerce, and we are looking at another revolution on the name of ONDC. And so we have on the one side, we have a corporates who have invested and created an ecosystem, created a habit. But on the other side, we also have this question to protect our local businesses because the organizations are harnessing the data, opening dark stores, and then trying to convert those orders. So the basic question that I have, on the one side, there are the tons of money that the organizations have invested and creating a customer base, and now with the use of ONDC, government wants to harness this. So how do you see that? Is this a solution, or what is the way forward, or it's if you can provide any solution for that?
So again, I think ONDC is just a protocol. ONDC doesn't store data. It connects buyer and seller apps. So it is a great enabler for smaller sellers and for sellers who don't want to register on multiple platforms. So, but we can have an offline discussion.
Yeah, and you can also probably get up to the ONDC side. There's the Beckn protocol, BECKN. It's a very interesting protocol, and it's the foundation for most of the work that is being done. So it could be interesting to take a look at that. Yes, please.
Sorry, I mean, just as it was with UPI, with Beckn, or with ONDC, which is the manifestation of the Beckn protocol, the fact of the matter is that nobody is mandating any entity to come onto the platform. If you're talking about incentives and you're talking about the customer acquisition costs and how they are going to be, redistributed, there's a point where, the mountain will come to Muhammad, where you do not need to, UPI was not mandating anybody, it just became the most popular form of payment eventually. So we'll see where ONDC goes, but the concept of it, of being a network which does not have any barrier to entry, where anybody can get access to an N number of customers and any customer can get access to an N number of merchant, is the real discovery process. And eventually we'll have to see where it goes on. The idea is that there doesn't need to be one or the other, is the very definition of why ONDC has come to be.
Yeah, I think it's exclusive. It's not exclusive, it's inclusive. So I think that's an important distinction. Yes, please, that gentleman.
Thank you to the esteemed panel. My name is Anshuman Chaudhary and I'm from Indian School of Public Policy. So for the AI judges, the debate which was going on there, I have a question that At the higher courts, we do have precedent based on the same facts and circumstances. Like we do follow the precedent that on the similar facts, this decision was given, so we should give decision. So why can't at the lower court we can have the AI judges? Because at the lower courts, we do have the petty offenses which do have almost similar facts and circumstances. And why can't India have that? And if we had that, if we can adopt that, what are the shortcomings we can have? Thank you.
Yeah, Pawan.
Well, quickly, it's a wonderful idea. There are some roadblocks. Number one, we still don't have legal recognition of artificial intelligence. So when the judge is going to be an algorithm, is it a legal entity who's going to be giving its mind? And for that, again, I need to come back with the legal principles on legally recognition of AI as an algorithm, as a legal entity, or giving them some semblance of rights. For example, we get this algorithm off the shelf and we put it and make it as a judge. We don't even exactly know how has the coder gone ahead and developed the algorithm. What kind of deliberate biases he has put in there so that the ultimate results can be lopsided. So ideas wonderfully well. My only problem is the IT Act currently does not give me the kind of a legal comfort that I can invoke these kinds of stuff. Yes, for clubbing, AI is fantastic. We can go ahead and club similar kinds of matters. We can use precedents. But right now, the thought process is let's first do it at the highest courts, then let it allow it to be percolated. Though I think the reverse could be equally better. For example, you just do all traffic challans to AI. Good, bad, or worse, with a maximum fine of 1,000, 2,000 rupees, you good, bad, or worse, you suddenly start realizing that you are actually coming to naught in terms of huge pendency of these traffic challans. Similarly, minor offenses, which does not really require much kind of an application, could be allocated. But
Okay.
again, then we'll require.
Just a request,
policy.
I would like you to take it offline because I think we have the next the minister waiting out there. So folks, you all have been a very engaging audience, and I hope you all found this panel discussion interesting enough. Please give all the panelists a big hand. And I think you all deserve a big hand for being so engaging, and you can continue this discussion offline. Yes.
Thank you so much. Once again, can we have a thunderous round of applause for our panelists?